Hello and welcome to today's session on the Connect and Grow Coffee Talks podcast. I have the honor to have Katie with me. We are working together since more than 2 years already, even three maybe. And
More than 3.
yeah, quite some time. And we want to talk a little bit about how we at Comsysto are structured, how we form our leadership, what kind of structures we have, what are maybe benefits and challenges. But before going into the topic, maybe you just want to say a few words about yourself.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name's Katie. I'm also based in Munich, same as Beja. And I started at Comsysto as a software developer, mainly focusing on like backend and domain logic and all the fun things. And over time, I got involved in more and more of our internal initiatives, ranging from recruiting to the book club to like many million other topics. And today I'm one of the fellows at Comsysto. I'm one of the market crew captains at Comsysto. And usually when I introduce myself, that means that I need to explain all of these words for 5 or 10 minutes. But I think that's what we're talking about today.
Exactly. So I would, over this episode, we should like clarify all of these words that you just mentioned, all of these concepts that we have. Um, Maybe we can start with like a little bit of history lesson to go over, okay, where this come from, where does Computer started at back then, and how did we end up with the structures that we really have? Um, do you want to start? And then I
Sure
can.
thing. So it started way before the two of us even joined, with a couple of freelancers that grouped together, joined forces. And then slowly but steadily, the company started to grow. It wasn't just freelancers, it was people with normal employments, basically. And we still had all the original founders in the company that were leading everything and taking care of it. At some point, we joined the Reply network. That was also before the two of us joined. And eventually, the original founders decided to move on and new adventures. And so the whole question of, well, how does leadership, how does all of this management stuff actually work at Comsysto? So one of the concepts that were introduced quite early was the fellow concept. Were you around when that was introduced? What was the original proposal? I've
That was even
seen some
before.
slides.
That was even before I joined, but the idea was basically to not the founders. It was five founders, and that it was just too much work, so they needed also to get new people into this to do the work, but also to also at some point hand over the leadership in case they want to also step out, which by now they all did. So they every founder back then had their own mentorship of a new fellow. So that's how it sort of started to grow this fellow round. And then at some point there were like 16 fellows, I think, which is then when it starts to get complicated because everyone was responsible for everything. And as sometimes, when everybody's responsible for everything, either no one actually does something or everyone does the same things and you get duplicated work in the end.
Yeah, it basically didn't scale, right? Like what we see with software and with architecture all the time in our project, the same thing happened in the company that having this group of 15 or 16 people be responsible for everything and then sometimes discussing everything at length in the big group or individuals deciding and that not matching. So yeah, it was kind of this scaling issue.
I, I,
Um,
want- I want to compare it like a monolith. So we started up with a monolith and it totally made sense. But at some time, the monolith was being too big. And now we're starting, like, we started to modelize them and take microservices out of it. Too.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that happened, I think it was 1.5 years ago. So a while back, the big seller group came together and went on an offsite. They realized, okay, we have a scaling issue. Things aren't working the way they are. We need to change something. And the thing they came up with was crews. So maybe for part of the history lesson, historically, Comsysto has always avoided using the word manager. We really don't like it. Like we actually detest it quite a bit, not just micromanager, also normal manager. And so fellow is also, it is a leadership position. It does have a lot of management-y things to it. But we decided to go with the term fellow. And now for the offsite, for figuring out how to split up the work and the tasks and finding like a good way to slice it. Again,
Yeah.
domain modeling, it's very similar to software. We do have software in our DNA. Um, so they started slicing all the tasks and responsibilities into like different sections, and we came up with 4 different crews was the term that we used for these groups. So a nautical word that doesn't fit to fellow at all, but that was also on purpose. And they decided that every crew would have one captain, so like a one person that has overall responsibility and does a lot of the communication with the other, I would say, interfaces. Again, software.
Yeah. But I think the important thing, especially when introducing these terms, was to not introduce any management layer because we do not like hierarchies. We want to have flat hierarchies or some kind of holacratic concepts. That was important also when it came to naming, to not introduce any layers, that we do not have like partners, fellows, crews, the rest. This was
Yeah,
important, but about different, maybe different slight levels and different, like, you have different tasks to do in the end and different responsibilities.
exactly. And the idea was to have these different crews that can make decisions independently. And yes, we have a crew sync. So Beja and me were both captains, so we also see each other in the crew syncs. Because oftentimes things that we change in retention also affect other topics. Things that we change in the marketing world affect like our tech strategy and so on. So it does make sense to stay in contact there. But overall, the idea was to have these independent groups that could run separately.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was the funny coincidence that we
Oh yeah, my favorite story ever. So this was also before I was a fellow. So I also saw the official announcement. We had a video broadcast done by Christian, one of our partners, and a day later, Eva, who's one of our agile trainers, walked up to Christian and said, "Oh, it's super cool that you guys are introducing UnFIX to Comsysto." And he looked at her and was like, "On what?" And to this day, all of the fellows involved in the naming swear that they had not heard about the model before. Maybe it popped up somewhere on their social media or LinkedIn streams. Exactly. But yeah, we noticed that kind of by coincidence, we picked the same words as the UnFIX model. So in case you haven't heard that one before, UnFIX is this model that was created by Jürgen Appello, who's also behind Management 3.0, which I think is widely popular also in the like more agile and leadershipy world. And he also defined crews and captain as a way to organize larger organizations. And we looked through the descriptions, and it's not exactly the same, but it is quite similar. And so we ended up sharing kind of the creation story of crews and captains at Comsysto at the UnFIX Con last year in Berlin.
Yeah, that was pretty great. Pretty funny as well. So, what, like, maybe let's talk a little about but what the benefits are. Like, what benefits do we now see from having these crews, having generally like flat hierarchies? What do we get out of it? Why don't we stick to just classical hierarchies as in maybe larger companies?
Mhm. So I've worked in both environments, and they're quite different, and they solve very different challenges. They have their advantages and disadvantages, but overall, if we take like the super extreme hierarchical models, we kind of split people into thinkers and deciders, so like the managers and the
Mm.
doers, like the workers. And I think it's such a waste to split that up, and it's
Okay.
usually quite frustrating or it's very exhausting. You have many bottlenecks or information lag happening. And so, with the complexity that we deal with every day with our customers and our projects and software and people and legal things and everything, um, it's it's just not the model quickly hits its boundaries and having or I strongly believe that like all of us are smart and are motivated and can totally work in self-organizing teams, not completely free and chaotic self-organizing teams, but kind of with some alignment and some direction and some effort and coordination. That usually works so much better. And as an organization, more you're so much faster and you're so much more capable at reacting and at generating really good value. And to be honest, I just enjoy it way more.
Yeah, well, you've got a lot more freedom and actually can think and you have to use your brain to say, okay, which direction is actually the right one to go. And it's more, you give a lot more structure via like responsibilities and guidance via responsibilities, which then also helps instills giving this kind of structure without people just telling you and you just follow without any thinking.
But it does require you to think quite a lot. And like every individual has to make much more decisions than in this classical my manager said so environment. And so I think what we noticed before we introduced the crew is that some form of specialization and some form of like formal responsibilities or kind of clear roles that does have a huge benefit. And so like finding that sweet spot, finding the right balance is an ongoing task.
Yeah, and also keeping this responsibility so over time they're not like lost or faded out, and then you end up in a mess or chaos again. To stick to them, to remind yourself, to remind your colleagues, or to have this use these dynamics that can actually get out of these clear responsibilities.
Yeah. And you also have to make sure that not all responsibilities end up on the same person and that it's like well distributed. And we make sure that we grow the entire organization around it.
Right. Um, Maybe one step further, like we now have these independent teams, we don't have hierarchies. How does like still how do we still manage to have some kind of leadership? How do we live up to this? Like,
Mhm. So our secret sauce, I don't think it's like one specific thing, but I think over the years we've built up slightly more formal communication paths. So like we have an all hands meeting once a month. We have a weekly post with all of the important things that are happening at Comsysto. And I always like to think of them as this like these pathways, or it kind of points you in all of the directions and all of the new communities, the new topics, the new projects, whatever is going on. And it kind
mhm,
of guides you into the right direction. And so that's like the formal communication, just that we make sure that everyone has the
mhm,
same base level of what's going on. And then in addition, we're basically a network. So it's about communication, it's about having connections between people beyond hierarchies, um, and just kind of letting people connect and network and grow and figure out things together. And basically this like best idea or the most interesting things then win.
I think it's also about like hiring the right people. Like we try to have a look on really hiring people who really enjoy these working in these structures because that's the key. Like sometimes it's okay, it's certainly fine if you have like private things going on that shift your focus, but in the end, this whole thing works when you're actually really like self-driven, motivated to really change something, to do something, and this also where this whole comes into play that like it flourishes in the end. And
Yeah, and so having this challenger mindset is something that's used typically in sales. So having people that speak up when they think something is a bit strange, or that pitch their ideas and share their ideas and spread the word, or just start an initiative and see how that goes. That's really, really valuable. And it works very well. I'm always surprised at how many ideas kind of bubble up from all sides. And
yeah,
how
and
those kind of influence each other as well to shape the culture that we have now.
you get inspired every time you talk with your colleagues. Every time I'm in the office and I have a coffee chat with someone and then they share their ideas, I'm like, oh wow, cool. I should join in this. It's rather than the challenge to also say, well, not doing that too much at the same time, but there's a lot going on, which is pretty great. And
Yeah,
there's
and
a lot.
it does require some self-discipline or kind of tuning down your FOMO at some points or picking your favorite corners. I know that you're laughing at FOMO. But yeah, both of us have a little bit of fear of missing out. And we really enjoy exploring different topics. But yeah, I think there's different preferences and different attitudes. And as a whole, like mixed throughout the organization, we have a really nice balance these days.
Totally. I'm also still very happy with that.
Me too.
Oh, maybe one last thing now. We talked about crews, how we structured, about fellowship. We talked about self-organization. Now, we both are crew captains. How does this work? Like, for example, in a crew with its leadership, how to guide without saying, okay, this direction and everyone just follows me.
Yeah, so definitely not micromanagement. So definitely not getting involved in every nitty gritty detail. There's a model that I picked up sometime last year, which I find super useful. It's the tight, loose, tight model. And basically, what it says is that with leadership, you want to be very tight around the why are we doing something? So, kind of the goal and the vision and the objective. You want to be very loose with the how. So, how is your team organized? How are
Mhm.
decisions made, or what is the decision that's being made? But then you want to be tight again when it comes to the what was actually done. So the result and recurring or repeatedly checking if those results match the goal and the vision that you set out. And then you kind of iteratively adjust as you go. And you kind of, as a leader, you can help your team reflect and learn from everything they've been doing and adjust with whatever needs adjusting. So yeah, figuring out how to be super clear with the two tight sections, but then
Mm,
also letting go at the right time. That's again, it's a balance
right,
that we get
right.
to work on pretty much every day.
Always, always. It just reminds me a little bit of how ideally a PO works in a Scrum team. Like you really have a clear sprint goal, for example, like clear goal, and you also have a clear look on okay, what is in the end delivered. But in the end, the how you just leave to the team, and that's not your responsibility. You don't care. Like,
Yeah, you don't care about the frameworks that are selected or how the code is written and which service does
well,
what. You just want it done. And then you at the end in your review meeting or maybe before you look at the end result, you look at the software, and you make sure together with the team that the overall objective, the thing that's valuable for your users, was actually reached.
yeah, mm, great. With that, I would say we probably could continue for hours and hours talking about any of these topics,
Absolutely.
but not make these podcasts too long. I want to say thank you very much for joining me. It was a
Thank you
pleasure,
for having me.
and
Hey,
always. And if there are any questions, just maybe write them in the comments, and then we can do a follow up. So
I'd love to.
thank you very much.